Has someone told you that your ADHD is because of your gut microbiome? Well, if they did, they're probably selling you something, but there is some truth to it, so let's talk about it. Hey, I'm Annika. I'm an ADHD nutrition research expert and science communicator. I help people learn what the actual research is saying about ADHD and nutrition so that you can make the best choices for yourself and for your brain. Because even though food's not going to heal us, it is going to help us. Now, if that's your jam, make sure that you are subscribed so you stay on top of all this research. So let's chat about the ADHD gut microbiome. As always, the summary is at the end of the video, but if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, just make sure you're watching the whole thing. So in this video, we're going to be covering 3 things. We'll cover what is the gut-brain axis, the latest 2025 research on the gut microbiome for ADHD, and then what do these differences indicate for us. In a later video, we'll talk about what you can actually do to help your ADHD gut microbiome without buying all those supplements that are doing absolutely nothing except for adding more stress because you are basically losing your money. So let's start off with what is the gut-brain axis. So in the research, we actually call this the MGBA, or the microbiome gut-brain axis. Now this is actually a pretty new concept, but it's true. So the gut and the brain are in constant communication with each other, and it works in 2 directions, the top down and then the bottom up. So when we think top down, that is how our brain is affecting our gut microbiome. So the brain actually influences gut permeability, the pH of our gut, as well as gut motility. Really what this means is when we are in, say, a state of fight or flight, our brain can send down some chemicals, specifically serotonin, which then slows our gut motility, which essentially means that our digestion is slow. There's a few pathways the brain connects to the gut. The main one is through the vagus nerve. This is actually why you see a lot of people talking about vagus nerve and nervous system regulation skills. In fact, I talk about that a lot too. The truth is we need to make sure that we are regulating our nervous system so that we can actually digest the foods properly. I do have an ebook tailored to ADHD on this topic, so you can find that in my store. Now we also have the bottom-up aspect. So that is the gut's connection to the brain. Now the gut connects to the brain also through the vagus nerve, but one of its main ways is through influencing something called a cytokine. So cytokines are things that can reduce inflammation as well as increase inflammation. The microbiome can actually communicate with these cytokines that can travel to our brain and then talk to our brain and tell it what it needs. The gut bacteria also communicate through different gut receptors. The gut microbiome also creates different neurotransmitters, as well as hormones, and all of these together can actually communicate with our brain. Something really interesting is that the gut microbiota, they can actually influence the permeability of our blood-brain barrier itself. When we have a dysregulated gut microbiome, it can worsen our blood-brain barrier, which then increases our inflammation, which is honestly not a good thing for anybody. So that's a really large overview of what the gut-brain axis is. Now let's talk about specifically what is the ADHD gut microbiome. So we're going to go through a little bit of this 2025 meta-analysis that goes through all of the research we currently have on the ADHD gut microbiome. One of the key findings here was that people with ADHD have similar microbiotal differences in diversity. Now, bacterial diversity is one of the most important markers for gut health. What this means is when you hear somebody saying that people with ADHD have worse gut health, they're not up to date with the research. However, there were a few key bacteria that were different. Now, if you want to nerd out about this with me, just continue watching. Otherwise, just skip this part because we're going to be talking a lot about specific microbiotas. But if you're still with me, let's do it. So a few patterns consistently emerged. For bacteria that were consistently increased, we saw Adorobacter, Agarthella, Agathobacter, and Fasciolaribacterium. For the ones that were consistently decreased, we saw Faecalibacterium, Eubacterium elegans, and then also Ruminococcus. Really interestingly, we found that the people who had the combined type of ADHD showed more distinct gut changes than the other subtypes. So what do these mean? Let's start off with the increased ones. So for Adorobacter, this bacteria is really important for turning fiber into short-chain fatty acids like butyrate or acetate. In a different video, we'll go over exactly why butyrate is one of the most important things for ADHD, but for now, just know that it's very important. So high Adorobacter may be reflective of actually a low-fiber diet, which is pretty typical for people with ADHD, or it can mean that the body has a more difficult time with metabolizing different carbohydrates. And then for increased Agarthella, we see that increased Agarthella is linked to chronic inflammation as well as increased gut issues. So since it's pretty consistent that people with ADHD tend to have higher Agarthella, it seems that there is some chronic inflammation going on under the surface. Now for increased Fasciolaribacterium. It's a long word. This is really important for turning carbohydrates into energy. Now, when we see higher levels of this, I'm not going to try to see it again. It's typically reflective of reduced inflammation and improved glucose metabolism, but it also could be reflective of an exaggerated immune system response or general difficulties with using insulin, therefore requiring more of this bacterium. And then last, for increased agathobacter, just like Adorobacter, it is really important for turning fiber into butyrate. And similarly, higher agathobacter could be indicative of a lower fiber diet or a higher fiber diet, or a body that has a more difficult time with metabolizing different carbohydrates. It's also associated with protection against Alzheimer's, which is really important because people with ADHD are at an increased risk for dementia. And now let's talk about the decreased ones. So on average, people with ADHD had a decreased amount of fecal bacterium, and unfortunately, this is one of the most important bacteriums in the gut microbiome. It is a key player in butyrate production, as well as reducing inflammation. So potentially those increases in Adorobacter and Agathobacter are responses to not having enough fecal bacterium. The other one that is decreased is Eubacterium allegens. Again, this is another really important one for butyrate and acetate production. When people have lower levels of this bacterium, we tend to see more increased inflammation as well as reduced butyrate production, which again, butyrate is one of the most important parts of improving your ADHD. And then last, on average, we see decreased Ruminococcus. Now, Ruminococcus is again one of the most important bacteria. It's one that actually turns the food we eat, specifically resistant starches. So think your cooled down pasta, your leftovers. It takes those and it turns it into food that the other bacteria can eat in order to create those short chain fatty acids like butyrate. So lower levels of this, specifically Ruminococcus brommi, which is the one we tended to see less of in the ADHD gut, was associated with reduced butyrate production as well as increased inflammation. And honestly, again, it's reflective of a low fiber diet. So what does this all mean for you if you have ADHD? Now, while we don't have a single clear bacteria picture or a gut bacteria signature for ADHD, the patterns we do see point toward something important. People with ADHD potentially just tend not to eat enough resistant starches and fiber, or our bodies are working harder to process them. Now, this does not mean stop eating your fiber. It's actually more indicative of eat more fiber. I know a lot of people will think, oh, that means I should just go do the keto diet. No, it does not mean that. That could potentially worsen your ADHD over time due to the negative impacts it will have on the gut microbiome. It does have some potential to be used as a therapeutic tool, which means you only do it for about 6 to 8 weeks. But I never recommend it unless you've consistently followed the ADHD diet, which is mainly following the dietary guidelines, for a minimum of 2 to 3 months. All these changes we see are also indicative of a body that is more prone to chronic inflammation. Now, this doesn't mean that your gut or your body is broken if you have ADHD, but it does mean that your microbiome may benefit from a little bit of support. There's a few things we can do to help your gut microbiome. I'll go into depth in a different video, but honestly, the biggest thing you can do to help your ADHD gut microbiome is through reducing your stress, increasing your exercise, and then increasing your fiber. So to recap all of this, the gut-brain axis is a phenomenon in our bodies where the gut connects to our brain and communicates, and the brain talks to our gut. And it is very, very real. The main ways it talks is through the vagus nerve, the HPA axis, cytokines and hormones, and then also some neurotransmitters. This is why when we're in more chronic stress, when we have lower levels of serotonin, also tend to see increases in gut issues. That's because serotonin is very connected to gut motility as well as hunger. For the current research on ADHD and the gut microbiome, we don't see differences in diversity, which is the most important aspect of gut health, but we do see differences in specific microbiota. These differences we see are indicative of reduced butyrate production, which is a short-chain fatty acid that's very important in improving your ADHD symptoms and reducing your inflammation. And these differences are also connected to increased chronic inflammation, which of course is connected to worsened ADHD symptoms as well. To help our microbiome, we want to reduce our stress wherever possible, specifically the chronic stress. We want to improve our exercise and movement, and then increase our fiber. In a different episode, we'll dive deeper into exactly what you can do using food to help your microbiome. To take all this information into practice, grab the ADHD diet. It tells you exactly what to do to help your ADHD using nutrition without making it complicated. Now, if you made it all the way through this video, I'm very proud of you, and you might want to check out one of these episodes next.